Traffic in Ecuador revolves around sacrificing safety for extra income. In other words, many drivers take risks that allow them to get from place to place faster, which increases the number of trips they can carry out per day. After landing in Ecuador, we immediately went to find a taxi to take to our hotel. That taxi ride was tremendously different than any I had experienced in the United States. Once on the road, I began to notice the lack of regulation in terms of lanes and speed limits. People were driving at all different paces, and one lane could contain up to 3 cars at any given moment. Drivers pass whether there are solid lines or not, and the people share a code using horns where 1 honk means the driver wants to pass, and 2 honks usually signals a thank you once the driver makes the pass. At first, I settled my worries by rationalizing that the driving habits were an outcome of the busy city of Guayaquil. But the next day when we headed to Zaruma, I realized that the lack of regulation could not be attributed to the city. The ride to Zaruma was a mixture of all different types of roads, which consisted of interstates, dirt roads, and gravel roads laden with potholes. While riding on the interstate, we passed a man sitting in the bed of a truck on top of an array of items without any secure holdings. And the closer we came to Zaruma, the more and more people we saw riding in the beds of trucks. Children would run behind trucks in the city and jump onto the tailgates to catch a ride, then hop off once they had reached their destination. Seatbelt regulation also has been minimally enforced during our trip. However, some of the taxis taken from Zaruma to Portobello asked us to wear seatbelts even though there were more people than seats. The lack of safety precaution in Ecuador was surprising because the weather conditions caused landslides and inches of water to fill the streets that caused driving conditions to be dangerous. We passed several landslides that have turned 2-lane highways into 1-lane roads that twist and wind around mountainsides. When such happenings occur, there are not caution cones or signs that warn drivers of the dangers around the curve. Instead, everyone drives at their own risk and must become accustomed to such happenings. The mountainside is not the only location that becomes hectic for drivers. Within the city of Zaruma, the roads become crowded and difficult for drivers and pedestrians. There are not many crosswalks within the city, and often the sidewalk does not stretch the length of the road, forcing people to cross the road as cars pass. The city also lacks parking lots, which forces cars and motorcycles to park on the side of the street and at the doors of local businesses. Many people ride motorcycles and dirt bikes from town to town without proper helmet use. For example, many men and women will ride the motorcycles and only the driver has a helmet. Also, people will carry their children and toddlers on the motorcycles in between 2 adult passengers. There is one area in Zaruma where the buildings have a small gap between them and cars are parked off the road, in which only 3 cars can fit. Additionally, there are few stop signs, speed limits, red lights, and no areas to turn around within the winding streets of Zaruma. Therefore, cars that must turn around have to carry out 3-point turns in the middle of the street with oncoming traffic stopping traffic in their lane and strategically missing the vehicles parked on the sides of the road. In 2009, the World Health Organization found that approximately 0.01% of the United States population died in a vehicle accident. And in the past 5 years, the number of accidents and deaths have steadily declined. The same study found that approximately 0.02% of Ecuador's population died, and the number of accidents and deaths have steadily increased over the past 5 years. In the United States, 50% of all deaths were categorized under 4-wheeled vehicles, whereas Ecuador's accidents were categorized as 65% other and 30% pedestrian. Also, on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being the lowest, 10 being the highest, the World Health Organization found that Ecuador enforced motorcycle helmet use at a 7, seatbelt use at a 6, and child restraint use at a 1. The same scale was not used for the United States, but Ecuador's helmet requirement law is nationwide, whereas the United States' enforcement is not nationwide. In comparison to the United States, the people here are much more concerned with getting where they need to be rather than caution. but I have seen little anger or frustration from our drivers. For example, when traffic is stopped in Macon or when people pull out in front of cars, people show little patience with other drivers. On the other hand, the people here do not bicker or harass one another. Everyone seems to understand the urgency of the other person and accepts that traffic will stop or that people will need to turn around or that the roads require one car to go at a time. However, the underlying reason for why traffic is perplexing to me is not the absence of wrecks or the unwritten code of the horns, but rather the justification for the risks people take behind the wheel. To me, $1 is not worth risking my life and passing on a solid line around a mountaintop. But to the people in Zaruma, Portobelo, Guayaquil, and other parts of Ecuador, the need to get to work or to make an extra dollar by fitting one more taxi ride into the day is worth the risk. They need every small amount they can acquire. This is why traffic in Ecuador strikes me as completely different than in the United States. Before this trip, I never realized how many individual factors contribute to a leisurely car ride. In the United States, the enforcement of safety regulation and the repercussions of breaking the law prevent money from overriding safety and create a culture of awareness of the value of safety. I now see those regulations as a privilege that many around the world are without.